behind schedule today.
We are recording.
Okay, are we already online, Quinn? Or?
Yes.
Okay. Well, now that I'm here, first of all, welcome everybody to our Landmark Commission meeting. It's nice to see lots of people here. Quinn, will you please call the roll?
Ellen Griffiths,
I am here now.
Robert Truca, Elliot Dyer,
Here.
Mike Meisner,
Here.
Louis Schultz,
Here.
Ryan Whaley,
Here.
Kima Yandel. Here.
Great. First of all, welcome to our new commission member.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, and welcome to the Landmark Commission.
Happy to be here.
Okay. I guess, are we starting with our,
Yeah, I let everybody know that we have 2 items of normal business that are just presentations. We don't have any votes tonight. They're both staff-approved items that have already gone through. We wanted to present to the commission as part of our normal process. And then we have a presentation on the design guidelines to follow that.
great.
So item number 1 is,
Minute.
oh, sorry about that.
Pardon me? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
We have to
minutes.
do the minutes, that's my fault. Are there any questions on the minutes from our February 23rd meeting? Okay, can I have a motion to approve the minutes, please?
So moved.
So moved.
I haven't been here, but so moved. I missed last
And a
week.
second, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Sorry, go ahead. Mr. Oaks.
So item number 1 of a staff-approved item is 214 West Market Street. It's for a wall sign. This is a contributing structure in the downtown Sandusky Commercial Historic District. The history of this building, it was built around 1880. Minimal changes have been made to the front exterior except to the storefront. The first floor has historically been a commercial use with apartment upstairs, which is still the uses today. The applicants placed one wall sign on the north facade of the building at 214 West Market Street, facing Market Street. Staff determined the sign has simple graphics and simple messages. The shape is appropriate. The colors are not fluorescent, and meet the guidelines. Sandusky's preservation design guidelines state that flush-mounted wall signs, window signs, and awning signs are most appropriate for commercial buildings. Good quality designs with simple graphics and simple messages are encouraged. Fluorescent colors should not be used, and the use of a white background is strongly discouraged. This sign meets all of those categories. The applicant has worked with staff to find a background color that meets the design guidelines. The original background color was white. Staff suggested to the applicant to make the background color an off-white cream shade to match the building's color palette as closely as possible. The applicant agreed to staff's recommendations, and on the screen is what was approved. Staff determined the signage meets the requirements mentioned in the guidelines. The final approved designs of the wall signage consist of acceptable designs with simple graphics and simple messages. The shape is appropriate, colors not fluorescent, and our primary colors are not flashy. The background is not white and is not internally illuminated. Staff granted administrative approval for certificate of appropriateness for the wall signage application on February 1st of 2023.
I'll add one comment. So this applicant went through a couple revisions of their signage with us. Ideally, it's not a light colored background, that a dark color background are typically seen as more appropriate, and we discussed that with them. It was not really in the realm of their design expertise to make those changes, so we thought that we shepherded this to the best outcome that we could get with the applicant and help this entrepreneur pursue their business.
Great, thank you.
Item number 2 is at 303 East Washington Street for a fence. This building is on the National Register of Historic Places. It was built between 1848 and 1853. Has historically been a multifamily dwelling since it was built, and is a good historical example in the city of Sandusky of a very early multifamily dwelling. The applicant proposes a vertical wood board privacy fence along the eastern property line from the front yard to the backyard. The applicant stated that privacy from neighboring properties has been an issue, and there have been several cases of vandalism. The fence will be 6 foot in height and painted white. The original proposal was vinyl. The applicant has worked with staff to change the material to meet our design standards, and the Sandusky design guidelines state to use traditional forms, picket fences, wood board fences, place side of fence along the street, place front side of fence along the street, and structural posts and stringers should be on the inside of the fence. Solve privacy and security needs with traditional wood or metal materials or landscaping, and should be painted or stained with an opaque stain compatible with the house's colors as an option. Staff has determined the color white matches the building's color palette and is appropriate. So staff also determined that the fence meets all zoning requirements and that the height, design, placement, color, materials are all appropriate and meet our guidelines. Staff granted administrative approval for the proposed fence on March 29th of 2023. That concludes our staff approved applications.
Okay, we're on to item 4, any other business, which is a designing local presentation on the Sandusky Preservation Guidelines, Sandusky Preservation Design Guidelines.
So I'll remind everyone that we are launching our design guidelines update process, and thanks, we have a number of folks in attendance for this meeting. This is our first public meeting on the design guidelines process, so it's an introductory presentation. After the presentation and the adjournment of the meeting, we're going to have a facilitated interactive discussion helping us set the direction. We're using a grant from the State of Ohio Historic Preservation Office to fund our design guidelines update, which we're really grateful to get to take a look at the design guidelines. Their last update was in 2007. We did send letters to all owners of properties that are in the historic district and registered on the Historic National Registry, and to invite them to this meeting. So we got some press coverage on social media and in the register. So great to see that kind of message out in the community. And with that, I'll invite Matt Ledger to the podium and to give us a presentation. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, members of the commission, and thanks everyone for coming out on this beautiful evening. We've got about a 10-minute slideshow here, so I'll try to keep it very brief, and then we'll get to the public meeting portion here. So just want to run through some of the basics of this project and kind of give an overview of what we're doing. A little bit about me. I'm a landscape architect and urban planner with a firm called Designing Local out of Columbus. We also worked on your public art and placemaking plan about 5 years ago, so we're very excited to be back in Sandusky, and we really love this community. You've got lots of great historic architecture, so this is a great project for us to be involved in, so we're excited to be here. All right, so just a little bit about the kind of background of this project to introduce what we're doing. So the purpose of the guidelines are really to provide direction for historic preservation, which we all know is a critical economic catalyst for the community, and it really defines a lot of your identity. So that's the purpose of the guidelines, is to really protect that and guide any alterations or changes to historic architecture in a constructive direction. The ones that are in place were last updated in 2019, so they're only about 4 years old, but they're generally mostly kind of text heavy, and we're going to talk about what we're going to be doing to modify that a little bit in our scope. The guidelines apply to all properties within a district, so either individually listed or in a broader district, which we'll get to here in a second, and then they're administered and interpreted by both city staff and the commission. So that's a little bit of how this works. So what we're looking at specifically to kind of add a little bit more content to the guidelines, things like patios, porches, roof decks, signs, streetscape elements, things that have been coming through the commission a lot that maybe need a little more clarification. So that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at. Same thing with doors, windows, and other types of building components. And then other things that we hear about tonight, that's really the purpose of this meeting, we can add to that if we need to. So as we talk to you all and you tell us this isn't really clear, we want some more information, then we'll get a better sense of some of the other things we might want to address. We're also going to look at things like fences and landscape features. And then really part of our charge is to just make the guidelines more user-friendly and still have text that explains everything, but also have a lot of graphic elements that says this is exactly what the guidelines are intending to do. So that's going to be the kind of biggest change, is to go from having text to also having a lot of graphic elements in the guidelines. And a big note, so this project is funded by a grant from the Ohio History Connection, so kudos to staff for going out and getting the funding for this project from another source. A couple definitions here. So this is from your city code, chapter 1161. So a certificate of appropriateness is a certificate that you need to have in order to fulfill that change, which needs to be approved by this body. So that's a key part of what the guidelines help to guide towards. A historic district or historic building, those are two different things. So a district is a collection of sites, whereas a building is an individually listed piece. So that's kind of an important clarification here. The city also has its own definition of a landmark. So there's kind of the National Register of Historic Places definition, and there's also the kind of local definition here, and that's that it has to be at least 50 years old, and it has to have significant character, interest, value, et cetera. So if you think about that, buildings that were built in the early 70s now can be considered historic. So that's an interesting little wrinkle of preservation right now. So preservation applies to a lot of different types of architecture, and those are some things that are coming up all across the country. And a certificate of appropriateness, as we mentioned, it applies to all landmarks or historic buildings. The city can propose that buildings be placed on the National Register of Historic Places and elevate them, and that goes through the State Historic Preservation Office. So you have to do a nomination, and then the State Historic Preservation Office then reviews that and recommends it to the federal government to be on the National Register. And once it's on the National Register, all the guidelines apply to that property or district. And then there's a minimum maintenance standard definition as well. So these really define what neglect or what deterioration might be causing, and you can, the members of the public or the Landmark Commission can actually report those properties to the city. So that's defined in here as well. So just a quick overview. So you have two historic districts and then a number of individually listed properties all across the city. So those blue triangles are individually listed properties, and the two red rectangles there are your districts. So we'll talk about that in a little more detail. So here's the downtown Sandusky Commercial Historic District, which you can see is roughly bounded by Decatur Street, Shoreline Drive, Washington, and Hancock. So this is mostly mixed-use buildings or commercial buildings, and the character is very much kind of in that frame. And that contrasts a bit with the Cable Historic District, which is mostly residential in nature. So you have two fairly different types of historic districts here that are under the guidelines. So a little bit about the process. So we're just really getting started. We've done some background research, and this kickoff meeting is really the first part of that public engagement process. So we'll be doing that throughout the summer and the fall. So tonight is more of the listening session, and then as we start to develop some of the content, then we'll get feedback on the content of the guidelines as well. So what we're doing tonight, like I mentioned before, we really want to hear what part of the current guidelines work well, which parts might need refinement. We want to get direction from you about some of those specific things like roof decks, signs, outdoor patios, and then we'd like to hear from you if we need to talk to other people that maybe aren't here. Are we missing folks that are important that we should be communicating with? We do have a pretty robust stakeholder list that we'll be talking to individually, so we've got a lot of folks that we're going to have one-on-one conversations with outside of this meeting tonight. And then some of our next steps. So we're going to be developing the draft guidelines and the graphic elements through the end of the spring and into the summer. And then we do need to run some of the drafts through the State Historic Preservation Office. So that'll be part of our review process, along with going through review with you all. So we have our second public open house towards the end of September right now. So stay tuned for that. And then we're going to wrap up the entire process by the end of the year. So that's the overall goal. So that's all I have for the presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about our process. Otherwise, we can adjourn and start the open house portion.
Yeah, so we'll take questions from the commission if you all want to engage any conversation. Then once we adjourn the meeting, we have a bunch of boards to facilitate with the members of the community that came.
Are there any comments or questions from the commission at this point?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
this is off the cuff, but I know we need to redo some of these guidelines. I personally, like the old House Guild members, I see a lot of them here, Historical Society stuff. I think that it's important to save these buildings that could last for centuries. And we're not going to be Williamsburg, but I think there's something we should preserve for down the road. And I know a lot of people are worried about what we do and how it might prohibit business or moving forward. So I think there's got to be a balance somewhere where the best preservation of these buildings is someone in there and taking care of it. If they're getting run down and they're deteriorating and let go, they're just going to collapse. And I've seen that over the decades. The one thing I'd be interested to hear is the landmark guidelines stated about you're not allowed to let your house deteriorate, and I don't know how we can enforce that. I know fire codes and building codes and everything have tried to come and play, and it takes forever to try to get someone to save a building. So I don't know if we can make teeth in it, but that's kind of just my statement, not a question, but unless you have an answer.
Yeah. Noted, yeah. So,
Well, just one thing I would say, obviously, we want these buildings preserved, but for somebody to spend the money to preserve them, they have to be able to pay for it. And so to pay for it, it may take some modification, and I think in many cases, we've taken that into consideration. So I don't think that's important too. I mean, again, it isn't Williamsburg, but
Could be someday.
somebody's got to make money if they're going to restore it, so, you know.
right. Yeah, I think the current guidelines have some flexibility, and that's something that we'll want to talk about, how much flexibility there is. So I think that's an important part of the discussions we'll have.
Mr. Chairman, I think just kind of both what these guys said, to come out of this with a much clearer idea, it's complicated. And, I know the goal of this is to make this clearer so that that entrepreneur, that business person can go in and have a real clear picture versus kind of, I don't know what to do. How do I do this? How do I fix this building? Can I even do this? So this is going to make life a little bit easier, I think, at the end of this process.
Okay.
I said it pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it seems clear until you try to make a decision on something currently, and then it's like a bunch of muds on everything. So there was clear definition, colors, not just like no white. There's 10 million whites, and then it's like, well, not that white, it isn't clear to anybody here, so, or blacks. There's a lot of blacks, there's brown blacks. Why do we pick one color of a canopy and not another color? And we're told, we have no reason why we turn somebody down. That's hard. It would be nice also to have some guidelines on how we make sure that these things are properly completed.
Okay.
And it was done after we suggest to do something. Because as I walk around on stuff that I've approved, some of it, I think, I don't know if that was done the way we told them to do it. There's no enforcement on that. And not necessarily enforcement, but maybe we have some way to acknowledge the fact that they followed the guidelines. It'd be nice to give an award to say, hey, these people did this much work. That would be things that I would like to see.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I think just very quickly in summary, I couldn't agree more. My driving guideline, if you like, or principle that I always use is that buildings are best preserved by being used, and our role is to make sure we're not being an obstacle to that. We need to preserve them, but they get preserved when people are in them. I love what you're saying about clarity and making sure that the guidelines are user-friendly. I think that's very important for our clientele here in the city, whether they're residential or commercial applicants. I'd like to see a simplified application process and increased use of our staff approvals, which I think we've done a reasonably good job of just recently, but having that be part of our guideline process would be great. Obviously, enforcement is complicated, but certainly we would love to hear some ideas about how we can make sure that people are following the rules and some way of making it, incentivizing people to do that, I guess is how I would describe that. And then lastly, particularly when we get into larger, more complicated things, there's always times where we need to deviate from what the guidelines are for practical, often economic purposes or reasons. So let's just be clear about how we do that and when we do that, if that makes sense. I love Kima's idea about an award scheme. Maybe that's in the guidelines, maybe that's something we address separately, but, where people have done a really good job and, really delivered above and beyond what they promised, we should be able to recognize that, so. Thank you, appreciate it. Looking forward to kicking this off and to working with you over the course of the next 6 months or 8 months or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, same here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Aaron, to you, we're going to formally close our Landmarks Commission meeting now, and then we'll start the public engagement piece of this on the design guidelines. So unless there's any other business. Well, you know what? I actually have one quick one. Alec, do you have an update at all on the property in East Washington Street where we had put a stop work order because of some windows?
Oh, yep, so that was West Washington Street.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. No word as of yet, but no work has occurred since the stop work order, so it sounds like pencils are down right now, and we're waiting to hear back from the applicant to see if there's any changes and what those would be and how we can address that issue.
Okay, understood. Thank you. All right, any other questions? Okay, without further ado, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
And we are adjourned. Thank you very much.